Awesome. So welcome to exam number 1 review. Very exciting stuff. It will cover everything that we have had in the course so far. Tonight I'm just going to go through we'll go through the cliff notes of each of the slides. I'll kind of point out what's important to focus on, what's not important. The learning objectives that were written for the slides are important. Those are a good study tool. Attending this is a good study tool. I'm going to post this recording on YouTube for folks that couldn't make it, or if you guys would like to rewatch it and just listen to it again if you think you missed anything. But this exam will be Monday, this coming Monday. It'll be online. It'll be the same format as our quizzes have been. And so that will be true, false, multiple choice, short answer, questions, matching. So very much the same format that we've had, just a large quiz basically, and it will be 100 points, and you'll have an hour and a half to take the exam, and it will be available to you from 8 a.m. to midnight basically. So whatever your work life schedule is, if you could fit in to just complete the exam that day. It is due on Monday, so make sure that you guys do that. Okay, perfect. So let's just jump into it. So this was our first presentation. It's very short. It's kind of a welcome to the class. You won't be quizzing anything about the viticulture program. That's okay. Viticulture, yes, really good to know the definitions of difference between viticulture and terroir. And we had a whole presentation on terroir, which is fantastic. So being able to explain those things. Any words that are bolded in slides are good vocabulary words that will most likely be on a quiz or exam. So structural parasites, tendrils would be another good one too. Maybe not exactly like what is a structural parasite, but if I asked you a question about like how would you characterize grapevines in the natural world, if you said structural parasites in your answer, I'd be very happy. I'd be very excited in that, because that was in the presentation. So it always feels good. Mission vines, I'm not going to ask you to memorize these specific vines. They're just fun examples for your learning entertainment, so you don't have to worry about memorizing that. I would say Cortez is a very important character in the development of viticulture in California. So talking about the conquistadors and how they came to the New World, and eventually how they brought grapevines with them, the European grapevine, and then Spanish missionaries planting for sacramental wine across the coastline and across a lot of the United States, had a huge factor, a huge part to play for that. If you can remember Listan Prieto, that would be probably like an extra credit question, if you could remember that specifically. Mission grapes, we'll definitely be talking about that. Pardon me. And then also how, just kind of the progression through the gold rush to present day viticulture in California in the United States. I think those are all really important. So just knowing the timeline of those characters. So first it was the conquistadors, then it was the Spanish missionaries, and the kind of knowing the timeline and the major characters involved would be very important for that as well. So cool. Gold rush. Again, another important character to the history and development of viticulture, but also knowing that growing produce and like providing fresh fruit, food, but also alcohol was much more successful than mining was. It'd be a really good point to remember. I think that's very important. And then these nurserymen. Again, this is another major character that aided in the development of our modern viticulture today. So you'll definitely be asked about nurserymen. You don't have to memorize these people or these dates. I don't think that's fair, but just knowing that there were nurserymen who played an important role, and that was part of the development would be the big picture to take away from that. So don't look at this and try to make flashcards or anything. You don't need to know that. Cool. I would remember Augustin Herazthi, and I apologize if I'm butchering that. He's a very important character. We did have him on the quiz from this presentation. I would like you to remember the Buena Vista Winery in Sonoma. I feel like that's important. And just kind of his role that he played in viticulture and who he was. you might be asked about that. So cool. So there's that. And learning objectives. So like I said earlier, just review those again. I'll see if I can open up the quizzes for you guys to go back and review them again. That might be helpful for you too, to see like what the question was, what you answered, and if you got it right or wrong. That would be a good learning tool as well. So you are welcome to do that. Cool. All right, on to lecture 2. This was viticulture basics, and this was a very good kind of introduction, for the class. So grapevine anatomy, it's going to be very important that you do know this. This was a whole quiz question where I asked you guys to identify different parts of the grapevine. That will most likely be on the exam. So if you feel like you struggled with that, definitely review that again. The types of vines that we use, it is important to know that there are different types of Vitis grapes. Vitis vinifera is the most common, most prolific one for the wine industry. Those ones mainly came from Europe. They're not from our continent, the United States or North America. And then there are other varieties as well. And it's just important to know that they exist and that they are very important for the use of rootstocks against phylloxera. So specifically, rootstocks that came from North America, American rootstocks, are the ones that are resistant to phylloxera. That will be important to know, for sure. And then, of course, telling me about what phylloxera is and exactly how it affects the grapevines. So I'm not looking for, if I ask you about phylloxera, I'm not looking for an answer that's like, oh, well, they kill grapevines. I would like a more specific answer, like they girdle the roots of grapevines, which can lead to fungal infections, and that eventually is the decline of a whole vineyard, and that you can't get rid of them, right? There's no cure for phylloxera. So that would be a much more appropriate answer that I'd be looking for in that case. Cool. Awesome. Variety versus clone. I can guarantee there'll be a question about this. And be careful when taking the quizzes and exams, because sometimes you just have to read to take the time to just sit and read the question carefully, because sometimes I'll slip a word in there, especially in a true or false question, where I'll say I'll sneak in something like very sneaky that makes it false when it looks like it's going to be true. So just make sure you take your time and read the question thoroughly. And we spent a good amount of time on this, so I think you guys have a good grip on this. But new varieties are created by sexual reproduction. So they take two Vitis, viniferas, and then they fertilize the seeds of one from another, right? So the male and female portions come together, and then there's a genetic cross through that, and that produces like the whole Punnett square of new varieties with new characteristics. Clones are taking cuttings and propagating them. That's how you make new clones that's how you make more clones, right? More copies of a vine to create a whole new type of clone. Then those are random genetic mutations that occur over time. So those are from stresses in the environment that the plant is exposed to, and it also relates to like epigenetics and how like we have like these genetic switches that just turn on and off depending on the stresses in our life. And anyways, it's very interesting. So that's how new types of clones are made. So knowing those three things, very big. How new varieties are made, how new clones are made, like propagations, and how new types of clones emerge as well. So that is important. And if you feel like you're having a really hard time wrapping your head around it, I definitely recommend reading these 2 articles. It'll bring the concept together for you guys. I tried to link articles to the slides that are relevant, of course, but also expand your learning on that. So if you feel like my description was a little confusing or there wasn't enough text on the slide, just open up the article and just check it out, and you'll be fine. Cool. Characteristics of plants. I don't think there's going to be much about this slide on the exam. We do talk about this a lot, right? The role of fruit. Grapes produce fruit to reproduce. They want to produce something tasty that a mobile agent, whether it's a bird or a bear or whatever, consumes it, travels a distance, poops it out, and then that seed lands in the dirt and has a new life. So those are the priorities of plants, is to repropagate and keep moving forward. So that's why we have grapes. The seed being designed to taste bad so it wouldn't be consumed, and covered in chemicals to keep it from being digested as well. Excuse me, sorry. Tickle my throat. Okay. Characteristics of grapevines. Big root structure. I don't think you're going to be asked anything about that. Things that could impact grapevine performance. These are always good questions for quizzes and exams. So this kind of just shows me your overall, wider breadth of knowledge and understanding of how many things can impact a vineyard. So if I asked you, I might ask you specifically about soil or location, or I might just ask you in general, can you list 3 things that impact grapevine performance? And then you could be like, oh, soil, and then maybe a little bit into this, location, and then disease as well. So that could be something to expect. Dirt in soil, not so much on that slide specifically. More factors that impact grapevine performance. So again, just more things you could potentially talk about as well. Human decisions. Okay, types of viticultural practices. Yeah, put a big star on this slide. This is going to be a great slide for quizzes and exams. Knowing the difference between the different types of farming that we have. This is like a really good matching question where I might ask you to match the farming practice with the definition that's correct. And these are all linked to articles, by the way. So if you'd like to read about biodynamic farming or organic or dry farming, you are welcome to click on those resources and expand on that, so that way you can either remember it better or just have a better understanding of what those are. So yeah, good slide right there. Factors that affect berry development and maturity. Another great question. Again, just kind of displaying your wide knowledge of things that can impact the vineyard. Yeah, dropping crop. We talked about dropping crop and crop thinning a lot so far in this class, so there will definitely be a question about dropping crop. You can expect that. Does everyone feel comfortable with like with the definition or like the description of dropping crop because of the carbohydrate demands of the vine versus the fruit and photosynthesis? That kind of makes sense to everyone. If not, just let me know. Okay, fantastic. Well, that is lecture 2. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Sarah. All right, on to berry development and the ripening process. This is a great presentation with, we got lots of pictures and identifying anatomy and physiology of flowers and stuff. I feel like it's very important to know that the anatomy of grapes and how they fertilize in the development. So you will need to know that grapes are hermaphroditic. That is going to be like another key word I'm going to be looking for or asking you about in the exam. It's very important. Insects are not necessary for pollination. Again, very good question about the reproduction of grapes and grapevines. Anatomy, again, this was on the quiz, and this will most likely be, you'll be asked this again on the exam. It would be very similar format of, these would be blacked out, same image, and you just asked to identify the anatomy of that cluster. Same thing with flower anatomy as well. We did that in the quiz. Again, words that are in bold are really good vocabulary questions and would most likely be on a quiz or exam as well. So anything in bold. Anther, stigma, pollen tube, optimum temperature for fertilization. Okay, fruit set. We got some really good vocabulary here with berry shatter. So that would be a really good question, is to, you know, tell me what is berry shatter, define it, and then what can cause it. That's a great short answer question. So understanding that, being able to define it and explain it. Again, we have another lovely article here if you would like. Chicks and hens, again, or hens and chicks, whatever. Another great question, I could even potentially ask you to compare and contrast the two and talk about how they happen. And if you wanted to throw in melarondage, I'm totally butchering that word, then that could be like a potential extra credit. Again, it's a word in bold, so I like to pull those kind of questions from the slides because I feel like they're nicely organized. I would hate to pull something from like a presentation that was like a small font or a small picture in the corner with ultra fine like description. Like that's not fair. So that's not a good time. So that would not happen. So yeah, hens and chicks versus berry shatter. I think that'd be a great question to compare the two side by side. Cool. And then we have some grape anatomy. This could be another picture where you have to identify the different parts of the grape. So I would memorize that the best you can. I don't see myself asking you very specific questions about telling me the difference between like the mesocarp and endocarp. That I wouldn't go too far into that. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just being able to identify it on the picture is just fine. However, I love this ripening curve, and this will be a source of many questions. So knowing the difference between stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 in the berry development is going to be very important. That will absolutely be on the exam. Put a big star on the slide or take some notes. Veraison, what is veraison? You know, when does it happen? What stage is triggered at the site of veraison? At stage 3. When it starts to develop color, you know you're in stage 3. So that's important. So stage 2 would be where acids peak, right? So organic acids peak. And then stage 3, veraison, and then sugars start to increase as well. Perfect. So knowing the different stages, fantastic. Don't worry about these words down here. Tartrate, tannin, hydroxycinnamates. Don't worry about those. That'd be for a more advanced chemistry course, not for us. So, and if you don't already know what those stages are, I have them nicely laid out on this slide, and we also have another article for your learning pleasure attached to that. So definitely review those. A really good short answer question would be like describe what an ideal conditions would be for grape at harvest. Or I might give you an example of like you are a you're a viticulturist in El Dorado County, and you just experienced the hottest summer in history of grape growing. Please explain what the chemistry of the grape would look like at harvest, right? So because we have an example down here of warmer conditions, right, you can see that sugar and acid ratios are off from where the ideal flavor where those would eat or meet, or like the ideal ratio. So you would have really, really high sugars and really, really low acids, essentially. So too high sugar, acids too low. You'd get dried fruit flavors, prune-like flavors, and it would be out of balance. So that could be a high point value short answer question. But I wouldn't give you the opposite of that. I wouldn't say like you have record colds, because I wouldn't. Well, maybe that could be an extra credit. We'll see. Okay, dropping crop and crop thinning. Again, we kind of went into this. There'll definitely be a question about that. When to pick. You guys know what that's like. Berry sampling. This was mentioned in the lab of the different ways to sample berries. That will be a great question for the exam, but that's not on this slide, so we'll get to that when I get to that slide. Okay, berry compositional factors. It will most likely be a question of, what are the components that you can analyze and look at as a viticulturist when it comes time to harvest your crop. And this would be the perfect slide to reference. You look at your Brix content, pH, seed maturity, and then you could even taste test your grapes as well. And then talk a little bit about each of those potentially and why they are important. Cool. So Brix, we had that fun lab where we measured the Brix content, and we kind of talked about potentially like what styles of wine. I think that was this class. We'll get to that when we actually go over the labs. But you do need to know that the sugar content is important, because when it transfers over to the winemaking side, that's how they kind of set the bar for the style of wine that they're going to make. So if you're making a sparkling wine, you harvest very early, it's lower sugar. If you're making a late harvest, it's just as the name insinuates, you harvest later, and that would be like a dessert style wine, right? So that is something that's really important to know. So I would highlight that or make that bold if that is easiest for you to remember, but that will be an important talking point as well. Okay, pocket refractometer, went over that in lab. pH, this is just a really good example of, or good slide about the definition of pH, why it's important, determines microbial activity. It's related to aging and keeps wine from spoiling, basically. It would be a really good question on this exam to talk about pH values and whether or not they are acidic or basic. So I might tell you, like, such and such beverage is a pH of 8.5. Is that an example of an acidic or basic solution? So knowing the numbers and whether it's acidic or basic would be a good review for that question. Cool. And next we have seed maturity. This is just another component to talk about in a question about how would you tell if a grape is ready to harvest. If you brought up seed maturity and talked about the seed turning from green to brown, that would be very helpful for your score on that quiz or on that question. Engustment, yay, it's a word that's bolded. So that is going to be most likely a vocabulary question that will be on your exam. So understanding what engustment is, it's the stage where aroma and also the color and tannin compounds come together, accumulate in the berry. So this is where people who pick by taste, this is a legitimate way to pick fruit, because you can actually smell and taste those things in the skins and juice of the grape. Cool. And then, yes, learning objectives for that. Great reference for study as well. So go through those again if you like. Cool. And on to yields, quality, and the science of old vines. And then we have one more lecture after that too. Okay. Okie dokie. Yes. So understanding these measurements and what we're talking about, right? So 1 hectare, 100 square meters, right? Or 10,000 meters squared. Then also there will most likely be a question about the difference between a metric ton and a US ton. There might be some, tricky true or false or multiple choice question where I will say 1 metric ton equals 907 kilograms. And you'll say false, or that's incorrect, right? So just paying attention. Again, taking your time to read through the questions and just double check your work, because sometimes we just read what we want to read and we see, oh, 1 ton, 907 kilograms. Yes, that's correct. It's like, no, it's 1 metric ton. It's different. So just pay attention to that. I think it'll be okay. I'm not going to make you do any math on this because I feel like that's cruel, an unusual punishment. So just knowing what a hectare is, what an acre is, just know like relatively the size difference, but I'm not going to make you do any calculations with that. So don't worry about that. Okay, yield and volume. This is kind of more for the winemaking class. If I think just from the viticulture side, trying to keep those two worlds separate, just from the viticulture side, knowing your tonnage per acre and adjusting that is extremely important and relevant to this class. But I'm not going to make you convert tonnage to gallons and try to figure that out, because that's a little more on the winemaking side of things. So you don't have to worry about that for this exam. But it is important to know the factors that impact the juice and wine yields. That's really important, just understanding that berry sizes are different. There's a reason why everyone's numbers for yield can be so different. So that is just important to know. Cool. Okay. More things to consider with yield too. We talked about density of the vineyard. How many vines do we have planted in that acre or hectare, whatever your measurement is, and understanding how sometimes vines are planted very close together and sometimes vines are planted very far apart, and that will affect your yield numbers, like how many tons you get per acre. So that's one reason why the number can be so different. And then also just understanding and respecting different vineyard sites have different capacities for growth and production. So keeping that in mind as well. So good questions. Again, what did I do? Here we go. Again, they're bolded portions will be important on the slideshows. Cool. Other things to consider, other parts of the vineyard that could affect production. It's good. I will never ask you to memorize stuff like this. Don't worry about that. That is just for reference in learning. I don't think anyone should be forced to memorize graphs. Okay. This is important. The New Zealand doctor that gives his argument for why dropping crop is not always ideal for all winemaking. You can guarantee there's going to be a question about this on the exam. Just kind of asking, I might be asking you just for a perspective. I might not even reference this person. I might ask you to, I might create a scenario where, say you work in a tasting room and an angry customer approaches you who thinks they know everything about wine, and they say they are arguing that dropping crop is the answer to everything. What would you say in response to that, in a kind way, right? We always want to be kind to our customers, as an alternative opinion, right? And you could say, well, it depends on the variety of grape. It's not necessarily a solution for everything. It is used in a lot of other places. If you wanted to reference, hey, Bourgogne is famous for that. If you wanted to put that in your little write-up, that would be awesome. You get lots of perks from me for that. And then just kind of say, maybe it's not ideal and give some reasons. And that would be a great question for the exam. Okay. Overcropping versus undercrop. This might be a good question where I might ask you to convey the consequences of one or the other. Would be good. And for this one, I don't think I'm going to ask you guys anything about this. I think you guys understand all the different possibilities of what the balance between crop and quality, yield and quality is. And I don't think there's much to say about this. Cool. Okay, for old vines, there'll definitely be some questions about old vines. I think there will be a good matching opportunity for matching how old the vine is and when it either starts producing fruit, when it's fully matured, and so on. Or I might say, at what age does a vine hit its stride? I'll try to use the same language to indicate to you guys exactly what I'm asking. So I'd say, at what age does a vine hit its stride and you start to taste both the fruit and the site? Then you say 10 years, and then that would be correct. Cool. Old vines. I would remember 35 years. 35 seems like it's a pretty standard cutoff for a lot of countries and a lot of wine regions. I think that's a good number to remember. I love this. I think it's really cool that Australia has this, but I'm not going to ask you to memorize that. That's more of a Wines of the World class question. It is important for you to remember that there's no age requirement in the United States. So that's kind of the big point of this whole slide, is that there are requirements all over the world for what an old vine is, but not in the United States, not yet, at least. So that's going to be a very important topic. Cool. Why are old vines desirable? Great slide for a question. I don't expect you to read this page of the textbook. I'm not gonna test you on the teenage hypothesis on page 141, because I didn't make the textbook required, of course. But if I had asked you why are old vines desirable, you have 3 other talking points for that question besides that, and any of those would be correct. Cool. Awesome. And then we have more learning objectives. Ta-da. Very cool. Okay, and then we had one more presentation after that for the lectures, and then we'll cover the lab as well. We had terroir, and that was posted Monday, so 2 days ago. It's a small presentation, just kind of digging into a little more detail on terroir, why it's important, and also some examples as well. So there will absolutely be questions about terroir, and it's important that you know all 4 of these components. So like be able to list them off the top of your head: climate, soil, topography, and then surrounding plants, right, and flora. So all 4 of those are important. Then also being able to talk about each one individually is very important. So sometimes when I do short answer questions, I like to say, please explain what terroir is. Please list the components that are related to terroir and explain. So if you just gave me an answer that just said climate, soil, topography, surrounding plants, you'd only get half credit, because I was looking for an explanation on that as well. I like to create questions that will prepare you if you work in a business or if you work in a tasting room or in the industry to educate others. And if someone had come to the tasting room and asked you this question, you could say those 4 things and it might be like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But they'll also want like an actual explanation for those things. Like, how does soil affect terroir? Like, what does that mean? You can't just say soil. So that's what I'm looking for in those types of questions. Cool. And then we have some good examples of climate, comparing 2 very different grape growing regions, Monterey versus El Dorado. What's going to be different between those wines, and why is it that there's such a difference between cold climate and hot climate wines? So I think that's a really good question. For this one, the climate situation, this is really the slide that I like to focus on for questions. I think this really nicely displays how they're so polar opposite, and also like the progression of how that creates a different wine, right? So cooler conditions versus warmer conditions, less ripeness, more ripeness, but with less ripeness comes more tart, bright fruit flavors, and like that makes sense, right? Because higher acidity, more bright acidic flavors, and that would also mean lower sugar. Lower sugar means lower alcohol, and lower alcohol means lighter body. So I really just like the progression of how that list plays out, because it just, when you put it in that perspective, it makes sense. You're not trying to memorize cool climate, low sugar, low alcohol, low sugar, low alcohol, high acid. You're not trying to just memorize certain things. It just kind of lays it out in a nice, very like methodical way. So this would be the slide to study for any questions about cool versus hot climate varieties. I also really like this slide too. This is on the quiz. If you haven't done the quiz yet, the quiz is also due Monday, because it was a week from when the lecture was posted, so the quiz for terroir. And there was a question on the quiz about describing the difference between a cool climate and a hot climate like Chardonnay, and this is exactly the slide to study for that. So high acidity, and also the flavors that would be compared with that. So green fruit, citrus fruit, and even vegetable components compared to like really ripe tropical fruit, pineapple, peach, mango, and even fig. So very, very good thing to know. Soil, very, very tricky thing to pay attention to here. We only talk about 3 soil types: clay, silt, and sand. Loam is a combination of those 3 things. So yes, it is a soil, but that is like one kind of tricky wording thing to pay attention to. Loam is a combination of those other 3 soils. Knowing the components that affect the vineyard. Again, we're talking about that wide breadth of knowledge that I like you guys to have. So soil porosity, water capacity, drainage, and then organic material and nutrients that are available. These are all things that are why soil is important to vineyards. We're going to have a whole soil presentation that will go into way more depth about that. Knowing the soil types and the coarseness, I'm not going to ask you to tell me how many millimeters coarse sand is. I'm not going to ask you to memorize those numbers. But I do need you to remember in relativity, like which one is the coarsest and which one is the finest. So knowing that it goes sand, silt, and then clay is going to be important to your quizzes and your exam. And then I might even pose a question. This would be fun to give you guys percentages of this triangle and then ask you to identify what type of sand or what type of soil it is. So I could say, well, I give you a mixture that's 60% sand and, 40% clay and, well, this would be like 60% silt, right? So then it would be sandy clay. So just being able to, line up on this triangle the different percentages and then identify where you land on this triangle. That'd be a good question too. So if you are having a hard time understanding how to navigate that, just let me know and I'll be happy to help you. But that would be a good question. So I'd give you 3 different percentages and then you identify which of these groups it lands on. Cool. Do we taste soils? This is a really popular question in the tasting room. People don't ask, can you taste soil? But coming from a wine tourist region like Apple Hill, we have customers come in all the time and say, oh my gosh, this Pinot Grigio tastes like apples. Is that because there were apple trees planted here and because this is Apple Hill? And the answer is no, that's not from the soil. It just comes from the grape itself and the yeast, right? So grapevines do not absorb like flavors from the soil. It impacts the grapevine's performance, but we're not out there burying apples and pears and, it's not like a tea, right? Where you can just put this concoction together and then that somehow magically gets transported into the grapes. No, it will accept all of those things as organic matter in the soil and decompose it, but it's not impacting directly the flavor of the grapes in that way. So that is a very important thing to be able to describe and, present to someone. So that will most definitely be a question on the exam. And again, it's all in bold. So anything bolded is important, most likely. What's the deal with dirt? These are all very good things to talk about, but I don't see a question coming from this slide directly. So I think you'll be okay. Topography. Topography is a very good question, and knowing all these points is important. I could ask you guys a topography question about explain like what topography is and the things that contribute to topography, or I can't think of another good example right now, but I do think topography is very important. We did a presentation through the Eldorado 8 for a bunch of wine buyers, restaurant owners, and like consumers, and one of the things they asked us to present on was topography and how, because of our topography, why we were so successful as a region or why our wines were so good, right? And so for a lot of people, we're talking about topography, like when we were pouring our Pinot Noir, well, that vineyard is planted in the basin that's very shaded and very cool, and all the cold air drifts off the back of the mountains at night, keeps that basin cold, and that's why we can grow Pinot Noir in that one spot at almost 3,000 feet elevation. So that is, why topography is so important. If you work, somewhere else where you are trying to produce something that needs a lot of sun, the hillside that you plant it on, the orientation of your rows, and whether or not you get good airflow, these are all very important things on the viticulture side and vineyard establishment. And it's also very interestingly, some of the things that get very romanticized in the viticulture side of things too. You see videos or wine writers talking about the sun-kissed hills of blah, 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 and, you know, all that stuff. So anyways, that will be an important one to be able to talk about. Surrounding plants and flora. Eucalyptus, garrigue, the Sierra Spice, and Eldorado, all really good examples of the impact that surrounding plants have. I think you guys have a good hang on this concept. So I think you'll be okay there. Cool. Are people a part of terroir? I thought this part of the textbook was really interesting, and it would make a very good question on the exam. And it might just be a philosophical question. I might just ask you, do you agree or disagree? And then you just get points no matter what. It's just there isn't necessarily a wrong answer. I just would like to hear your input of what you think. So kind of mull over that. Do you think that humans contribute, or do you think they are essential to the definition of terroir? Like, can you have terroir without them? Then we have another concept, another really good kind of big picture philosophy. When we think about terroir, it's more than just the vineyard, right? It's also the cellar and the cleanliness of your cellar, and then any other additional situations, like, for example, sherry with the flora yeast. I think that's really interesting. I don't think I'm going to ask you anything on the exam about this. I think this is just another interesting, really fun topic. Cool. And then we have our learning objectives for that. Cool. So those are all the lectures that will be on the exams. That's lecture 1 through 5. And now let's go over to labs. We'll start with our bricks lab. Let's go through the presentation. Bricks lab. Yay! Okay. Potential alcohol, initial bricks times 0.6. Let me just... No, oh, that is small. Okay, we did not do any... We did do some potential alcohol. Okay, so there will be potential alcohol calculations on the exam. So anytime that there's a calculation, I'll provide you the formula. So if I ask you what the potential alcohol is, I will give you the formula for this. So it's initial bricks times 6. I might decide to be tricky, and I might say you are tasting a wine that's at 15.5% alcohol. What do you think the initial bricks was on this wine? Or what do you think it was harvested at? And then for that, you would just divide by 0.6. So use the same formula, just putting in where it belongs in the formula. So that could be a possibility. To create a brick solution, this is going to be a great question for the exam. I would give it to you within a 100 milliliter solution, with a 100 ml solution, to make it easy. I'm not going to ask you to make me, 6.2 gallons. I'm not going to ask you to convert from milliliters to liters to gallons. It would be the very straight up equation of, what's a 6 brick solution, what's an 8 brick solution. Assume 100 milliliters. The important thing to know is the degree of bricks is the grams of sugar, and then it always needs to equal 100. So whatever the difference is, it needs to be 100. And there you go. And it's very important, please give me units and what it is. Don't just say 1 sugar, 99 water, or just 1 gram plus 99 grams. I need to know your units and what it is that you're telling me that you're adding to make that solution. So please include that. Also a good question, the different types of vineyard sampling and how those are done, and also maybe which one is best, or it doesn't matter. We understand that vineyards are very variable, and grapes don't ripen uniformly either. Those are good concepts to take away. What can cause variation in clusters? I put a big star on this slide. It's another great question to ask as well, so understanding what causes that. And here we have the different types of sampling, which we went through. Ripeness, sugar, acid, seed maturity, and by taste. We kind of had this in another presentation, just kind of a nice reminder. Cool. And the different types of ways to measure Brix content, right? So refractometry versus using a hydrometer. Understanding how that works. Not accurate when measuring fermenting juices. That's going to be a good question. That is highlighted. How to calibrate, right? So that would be a good kind of, story question where it's you are measuring a group sample, but you're not sure if it's correct. How do you double check yourself with your refractometer, right? And then answer would be, you can use distilled water and you can make sure that it's reading at 0, and if it's not, you calibrate it, and or you create your own Brix solution of 5 degrees Brix, and then you test it on the refractometer, and then if that was correct, you would know that your refractometer is good to go or not. So that would be a really good question, kind of working through that. Then we have, I'm not going to ask you about digital hydrometers. I think it's important to know how hydrometers work through buoyancy. And also it's important to know that hydrometers can measure fermenting juices. So we can't use the refractometer for fermenting juices, but you can use the hydrometer. That is important to know. Cool. Sources of error and measurements. These are things that would be on your lab, on your lab questions. So again, these are important. Temperature, CO2, and alcohol are going to affect your measurements. There'll probably be some Brix conversion calculations, and I will supply you with this chart, and then you would just utilize this chart. And you're welcome to use a calculator if you need to for that. But again, just remember, degrees Brix is this top row, and temperature is the side row. So the that axis there. Then you just meet in the middle. And I'd be nice to you on the exam. I would tell you 15 Brix or 30 Brix. I'm not going to say, 22 Brix and then try to see which column you'd pick. It'd be very straightforward. Just making sure you know how to use it and when to use it. Okay, so that's the Brix presentation for the, wrong way. For the Brix lab, you guys should all have your labs back and they should be graded. So those are good references, good things to review. Again, we'll have the adjusted Brix calculation on the exam. As far as anything else, potential alcohol, we talked about that. Sources of error. Okay, cool. And then I think we kind of honed this in. When a Brix is negative, when something's done fermenting, it's because alcohol is less dense than water. Water is 0, so anything less dense than 0 is going to be a negative value. So I think most all of you guys got that right. So okay, should be good. Okay, on to the next lab. pH. Cool. So wine is acidic, as we now know. I think these first 2 points are really important for pH and wine. So we think about pH, it's stability, right? It's the health and the vitality of the wine. But pH itself is a measurement of free hydrogen ion activity in a solution. I think if you're going to take away anything, I think that's a good one to take. High acid wines, sharp in taste. Low acid wines can have a better mouthfeel, be more viscous, but can also be flabby. Those would be important things. We talked about the pH scale and understanding like an increase of acidity would mean a lower number in pH, right? An increase in alkalinity would be an increase in the pH number in general. And then 7 is neutral. Cool. I will not ask you to give me the difference between acid and base, but this is important. The lower the pH value, the more acidic it is. The higher the pH value, the more basic it is. Those are important. Cool. Ways to measure. I won't ask you about these other situations. We just use the pH probe in class to be okay. If I ask you a question about the style, the bricks and the pH, I will give you this chart as reference. So kind of like we did in the lab, we looked at the numbers and then talked about whether we thought it was ripe or not. I would provide you with the chart, and I would also provide you with information about what the seed looks like and what you think and what style of wine. Give me the reasoning for what style of wine you think that would be best for in that situation. Cool. Just making sure I'm not missing anything else. Okay, that was that lab. Cool. Okay, I think that covers everything that we went through in the class so far. I'm not going to test you on anything we did on the wine tasting. Maybe I'll ask an extra credit question about what your takeaways were from that tasting, like what you thought maybe all old vine wines had in common, if there's like a similarity or what you thought about that. But since everyone was not 21 in the class, I'm not going to force that for credit. Cool. Okay, any questions? Thank you, Sarah. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna stop the recording as of now. I'm gonna post this on YouTube. Okay, recording has stopped. I'm gonna hang on here for just a couple of minutes for anyone else has questions. David, I see your question here. Yes, influence of people on terroir. Okay, let me bring up that slide for you one more time. We can talk about it. Cool. Okay, so hopefully you can see this slide. Okay, so the concept here is that terroir is expressed through wine, right? And you can't express terroir in just the grapes. The grapes have to be transformed into a product to taste and show terroir. So the argument here is that you can't have terroir without the vineyard, the grapes, and the person making the wine too. And it's up to the winemaker to like fine tune. It's like fine tuning a radio to understand the terroir, understand what the region brings, and to focus that in the final product of wine that's being made, or cover it up with recipe winemaking or other baloney in the wine. So this was a part of the textbook that argued that, and I have a quote here, the human element of terroir, its expression in the wine, is an interpretive act. So that was the argument from the textbook. And a question on the exam about this would be maybe like a philosophical, like, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that, or do you disagree? Do you think you could just put grapes in a bucket and terroir is still expressive through that, or just kind of a philosophical, so the human brings out? Yes, so that's the theory, is that it's up to the human to understand what the terroir is and to bring that out completely in the wine itself. Yeah. Yep, good question. Cool. Awesome. Very cool. All right, well, if you guys feel good about it, you're welcome to leave the Zoom meeting. But like I said, I'll stick around if anyone has any more questions or wants to talk